Welcome to the SoLoMo Show, a weekly podcast hosted by Corey O'Brien, the social media strategist at Heat and author of thefutureofads.com.
And I'm Adam Helway, CEO of the digital marketing agency Secret Sushi Creative.
Each episode, we discuss topics, trends, tactics, and tools related to social, local, and mobile marketing and advertising. Our goal is to give you the information you need to be a better marketer. Today is Wednesday, January 16th, 2013, and this is episode number 52.
In this episode, we're going to discuss Facebook's graph search, LinkedIn crossing the 200 million member milestone, Firegram and how to get more followers on Instagram, Timbuktu focusing their retail efforts on mobile, and much more. Good evening, Corey. Good evening.
Good evening, Adam. Quite the episode we've got lined up. A lot of exciting stuff. There's sort of a calm period, like the beginning of January, nobody wants to announce anything, and then, mid-January, it's like, all right, no holds barred, let's announce some big stuff we've been working on over the holiday break. So today, that big announcement is Facebook's Facebook's graph search, which we are going to dive in, but even in addition to that, there were a lot of things that happened that we wanted to cover, so I'm excited about this episode. I think there's going to be a lot of fun stuff and a lot of good things to cover. How are you feeling? Is this going to be a good one?
I'm excited. I'm excited because of the topic, but I'm also excited because yesterday was your birthday, Corey. Happy birthday. We'll put that down. That's why we're recording on a Wednesday instead of on a Tuesday. Did you enjoy your birthday last night?
I did. You can only turn 52 once, so, I enjoyed that quite a bit. No, actually, we went to a fun little restaurant over in Oakland called Pecan. It's a bourbon and southern food restaurant. I had a fried chicken with truffle honey and all sorts of bourbon-inspired drinks. It was a fun little evening. So
what?
I know. I enjoyed it. Despite the fact that we had to move SoLoMo Show, which pained me greatly. It happened to line up with my birthday, so we had to shift it. Do the little 24-hour shift, but we are back in full force. So I'm excited to dive right in. And our first story of the day, maybe we should just dive right into that, is LinkedIn. Speaking of big milestones, big announcements, LinkedIn crossed the 200 million member mark on January 9th. They made that official via a blog post and talked a little bit about 200 members and what that means for them and, where that growth is coming from and what industries are most represented in LinkedIn, who are the most followed LinkedIn members now that they've opened it up for a little more of the Twitter-style following. So figured we'd run through some of those numbers and just talk about LinkedIn because sometimes it gets ignored. It's sort of the utilitarian social network, if you will, and we don't talk about it a lot because there's not, the sexy social media marketing that can be done on LinkedIn. But, 200 million members, that is no small number. It's nothing to sneeze at. So Adam, what struck you about the 200 million member milestone? Anything that stood out? Anything that surprised you? Was it sooner than you thought? Was it later than you thought? What was your take on LinkedIn's announcements?
LinkedIn's growth has always been very slowly paced, and it wasn't until, I don't know what it is, the IPO. Although the average LinkedIn user shouldn't be affected by something like that per se. But it seems like after they went public, they really invested a lot into a lot of engagement features that they could have invested to long time ago. And so for whatever it's worth, they've just ballooned in their listenership very, very quickly. So, I'd say it's not necessarily that it surprised me, but, it wasn't that long ago where they were talking about they had gone from like 120 million to 150 million and now to 200 million. So I think that's pretty awesome.
So diving into this nice little infographic they put together, talking about the LinkedIn members and where they're coming from. 74 million from the United States. Obviously, it's a US-based company. 74 million, no small number there. That's almost, a little shy. It's 74 out of 200. That's 3/8 of their total members come from the United States. Doing a little back of the envelope math there. But looking at other larger countries, 11 million LinkedIn members come from the UK, 7 million from Canada, 11 million from Brazil, and 18 million actually come from India. So plenty of international growth. And actually looking at their fastest growing countries, number 1 is Turkey, number 2 is Colombia, and number 3 is Indonesia. So I think if you're a company doing any sort of international business, LinkedIn is probably something you should be paying a lot of attention to, and especially when it comes to mobile. So mobile growth, they talked about their top 5 countries, and that's China, Brazil, Portugal, India, and Italy. So I think if you're trying to reach international users, especially B2B, I think LinkedIn is kind of the B2B mecca. If you are a B2B company, you're probably already doing some sort of LinkedIn, whether it's group outreach, whether it's, really paying attention to the updates that you're posting as a company on LinkedIn. But, I think LinkedIn is obviously continuing to grow, but especially international. You're seeing a lot of growth, a lot of continued growth, which is good signs for the continued purposefulness and usefulness of that network. What do you think about that? Does that seem like the way to go if you're looking B2B or international? Is LinkedIn still the place to go?
I think it's more the place to go, right? They expanded into these other markets after the fact, and even, for instance, recently, the Middle East was a place that they reached out to and expanded, which is likely why Turkey, for instance, has become their fastest growing country in that area, right? So no, it doesn't surprise me at all. It's definitely becoming more and more a international affair.
So looking at some of the largest industries, which this I thought was kind of interesting, information technology and services, that one didn't surprise me. That was number 1 with 4 million members. But financial services actually came in number 2 at slightly higher than 2 million members. And then higher education at 1.95 million members. I think higher education is probably something that snuck by me a little bit. I didn't necessarily think of LinkedIn as a go-to place for people to connect in the higher education world. I often think of that as these news groups and these sort of inter-school groups, but a lot of higher education people are connecting through LinkedIn. So, if that's your industry, LinkedIn might be the go-to place. That one definitely, surprised me a little bit. And then just running through their other industries, computer software came in 4th place at 1.65 million users, and then telecommunications at 1.59. So a lot of the bigger industries, the industries that have more people working in them, obviously higher represented inside of LinkedIn. And then speaking of things that surprised me a little bit, they talked about the most followed users. So this is a new feature of LinkedIn where you can follow someone very similar to what you can do inside of Twitter. And the number 1 most followed user, could you have guessed what it was going to be before you saw this infographic, Adam?
I don't know if I'd say it would likely be in the top 5, which it is, but the number 1 guy, right?
Number 2. We'll start with number 2 because this is the one that I was like, okay, this makes total sense. Barack Obama. That guy's got a job that everybody wants to know a little more about. You're definitely most likely to follow Barack Obama, see what he's up to, see who he's linking in with. But the number 1 most followed, the user followed more than the President of the United States, was Richard Branson of the Virgin Empire fame, Virgin Mobile, Virgin Airlines, all those fun little companies he's working on. And I thought this was interesting because it seems like, people are following him more for maybe the entertainment value. They want to see what he's launching, what he's working on. So I thought that was interesting.
But what they're primarily following folks for on this is not necessarily just to see the standard updates, but because they're part of their I forgot what they call it, like their thought leader feature, where they actually are writing full on blog posts within LinkedIn. And personally, I've found a lot of value in stumbling upon the blog posts from folks like Branson and even Tony Robbins, who's number 4 on the list, and some of the other folks. And so I actually think the advice, the reason I follow Richard Branson is because I want to kind of get some insight into his business savvy, right? And I'm interested to see the sort of stuff that he's sharing. And so I don't know about the entertainment value stuff on my end. I would say most of the stuff has just been really highly educational.
Yeah, that's probably fair. I think more people, Richard Branson's more likely to actually log into his LinkedIn, share something cool that he came across. Maybe he read something. Maybe he watched a video and he wants to share it. Barack Obama, he's got a team of people that are managing that. They're posting updates for him, but it doesn't feel as directly connected. So I think that makes a lot of sense. And just to round out the infographic, they talked about some fun stuff. If LinkedIn were a country, it would have the 5th largest population in the world. It would be bigger than Brazil, slightly smaller than Indonesia, and it would have a population equal to France, UK, and Italy combined. So, taking that all into account, I think that LinkedIn, it's trying to remind you, don't forget about me. It's still a valuable network. It's got 200 million users. That's 1/5 the size of Facebook. But at the same time, those are 200 million members that are very focused on, goal-oriented things. They're trying to further their career. They're trying to make business connections. They're trying to find companies to work with. So I think that LinkedIn is valuable, and despite the fact that, oftentimes it gets a little overlooked when other networks are doing more buzzworthy things, it's obviously still growing. There's still a lot of value there, and it's still worth checking out. So we'll include a link to this infographic in the show notes. Those are available at solomoshow.com. So we encourage you to check that out. But moral of the story, keep an eye on LinkedIn as it continues to grow past the 200 million member milestone.
So now for the good stuff, man. Now for the juicy, exciting stuff, right?
I know. I was excited. I really am intrigued by this Facebook graph search. I was kind of pushing through the LinkedIn stuff. Let's get to the good stuff and dive right into Facebook graph search. So this was Facebook's big announcement. They called a press conference. They invited people literally from all around the world to cover this. And so it caused a lot of people to speculate. What were they going to announce? Was it going to be some sort of reconfiguring of their wall? Was it going to be a double down on mobile? And what Mark Zuckerberg got on stage and actually announced was what they're calling Facebook's third pillar. So they've got the feed, they've got the timeline, and now they've got Facebook Graph Search. And really an interesting product. It's basically a search engine for all of the data that Facebook has been collecting over the years, and a way to present that data in really unique ways, and ways that haven't really been available previously with existing tools. So just looking at a couple of things, this is kind of reminiscent of, it's got some elements of Foursquare in there, it's got elements of Yelp, it's got dating sites, whether that's,
I would say it's potentially got a little LinkedIn as well, to be honest, if you do your information correct in your bio, right?
Exactly. Throw in, 200 million members of LinkedIn, you've got yourself a little LinkedIn in Facebook now. So how does Facebook take on Foursquare, Yelp, Match.com, and LinkedIn all at once? Basically, it turns all of the data they have on all of their users into a searchable database, but not in the way that we think of searching Google, where you're sort of putting in a keyword and trying to figure out what links show up. They're more looking at result-oriented searches. So, Foursquare, let's say you wanted to find all of the restaurants that your friends have liked in the San Francisco area. Well, you go to Facebook's graph search and you type in restaurants that my friends have liked in the San Francisco area, and it's going to populate a list for you. It's a really interesting and new way of searching data, and something that, I think it's going to take people a little while to get used to, but eventually could be a really useful way for searching a lot of data that you didn't necessarily have access to, or at least think was accessible previously to this announcement. What was your take on that, Adam? Do you think that this was, a big announcement worthy of the attention that they gave it? Or do you think this is going to be something that, maybe doesn't quite reach the potential that a lot of people were hoping for out of Facebook's big announcement?
I think that the signal that they've put out there, you can pay attention to how any startup, let alone Facebook, announces a particular feature, the sort of support that they put on the site to kind of educate folks about a particular, feature, and the words that they use, and how they're saying, like, what they intend to put into that particular feature. And all signs point to the fact that currently graph search is pretty cool, and not a lot of people are having an opportunity to play with it yet, because it's in closed beta, and they're giving people invitations as they go. And quite honestly, I don't even have access to it, but I've looked through all the materials that they have, and I've read up in a number of different ways. But based on what they've wrapped around that and the sort of support they've provided and the other tools that they've added, such as privacy and stuff, which we'll talk to in about a second, it actually looks to be a really huge deal in the long term. Will build, eventually as they provide more data and availability for that data. And I think, as we already noted, it has the opportunity to really kind of eat the lunch of a lot of very big niche startups that are one's, very much a professional networking site. Others are geolocation, location-based restaurant, brick and mortar business lookup type sites. I think it's a big deal, but it will be an evolving big deal. And I think those regular users who are on Facebook are just going to go, that's kind of cool. But until they start to actually play with it and use it, and more information goes out and people really start to talk about its capabilities based on experimenting, I think the average user is not going to think it's very significant at the moment.
Yeah, that's interesting. I sort of had the same idea. At first, I was like, holy crap, this could kill off Foursquare, Yelp, Match.com, LinkedIn, all these other things. Like Facebook basically replaces all of those and with the right types of searches. And then my second thought was like, well, right types of searches, I already have to explain to people how to do Google correctly. And you think of Google as like, oh, everybody knows Google. But really, a lot of people don't understand, beyond the basics of Google. They don't understand including things like ands. They don't understand putting terms inside of quotes and how that changes Google search results. So if you think about Google, millions, hundreds of millions of people use Google every single day, and yet people are still using that site on a very base level. So to get the value out of this new Facebook thing, again, it's learning a whole new language. It's learning how to format interesting searches, how to actually think about the data that you want to uncover. And I don't know that out of the gate, a lot of people are going to be willing or able to do that. So I do kind of second that notion that at least initially, it's going to be this really interesting play toy and you're going to be able to get some interesting data out of it. But will it overnight transform the lives of everyday users? I don't know that it will. I think there's going to be some ramp up time while people really get used to the data that's accessible. They sort of, garden and cultivate their own data to figure out how they want to appear in searches. I think that there's at least, 6 months to a year of kind of figuring this thing out, which at the same time is very exciting. It's very interesting to see a technology that, out of the gate isn't like, okay, I get it, I'm using it, it's perfect. It has this sort of evolving nature to it. That
it's kind of like Facebook's long play, right? It's the long play. I don't want to say the long con because that's a bad connotation, but it is Facebook's long play. They're saying like when they call it a pillar, to me, it's echoing when Steve Jobs started to call all these individual parts of their business, his business at Apple, pillars. They were like, Mac is our pillar, and then the iPhone is a pillar, and I don't remember if they said the iPad was a pillar, and then Apple TV was like a wobbly pillar that they didn't even continue. But they were basically trying to say, here are the main legs that our business is standing on, and Mark Zuckerberg essentially announced it in that fashion. And so that tells me that this is going to be ever evolving. And we've talked about, for instance, other sites and other platforms, everything from Foursquare and Food Spotting and a lot of other sites, even ways where a lot of what they've done initially is they've found ways of encouraging folks to provide data. And once that data becomes plentiful enough, then it's now about a new phase of that particular product or network. And it's about how do you mine the data or use it and leverage it to your advantage as not only the company itself, but how do they provide it back to the user in very interesting ways. And that's what's so exciting about this is we're talking 1 billion active users, not necessarily just 1 billion users, but 1 billion active users. It's the largest database in the world of its kind that we're now being given access to cull through, right? But if we dive in a little bit more, and we will in a second, about, well, what does that really mean? I think things get really interesting. It's one thing to go on there and say, like, Indian restaurants my friends like. It's another thing to actually go on and in the future, and they kind of alluded to this in the video and in other things where you can make combinations of more complex questions like, show me photos of mine that got more than 3 likes, or show me photos of mine that got more than 5 comments. assuming based on what they've shown, there is the potential, I think, because they showed, for instance, show me photos before 1995. Right. And so when you look at those sorts of queries, you can see that they're starting to add kind of like quantitative stuff into it and time-based stuff to it. And all that is incredibly interesting to be able to look at that information across the entire network, assuming that it's available, public, in other words, in a way that they're providing.
You bring up something interesting, and I wanted to return to it because I think the tendency for a lot of marketers on this announcement is going to be to jump to the sort of third level cool stuff. It's like, all right, I got the basics, I got the kind of cool thing. Let's talk about searching for photos from 10 years ago that my friends of friends have liked and doing some cool stuff with that. But I think what you mentioned of what are the Indian restaurants in San Francisco that my friends liked, there's a lot of potential there, and there's a lot of data that hasn't yet been finalized. So I don't know if it's just me, but I sort of, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, when I was liking things on Facebook, there was a high bar. It was the things that I was liking were things that if you asked me, like, what are the TV shows when you go home at night, you're tuning in the day that a new episode airs. It wasn't things that like, 10 years ago, I kind of liked it. It was like, what are the shows you're most passionate about? What are the 3 movies from the past year that you really liked? What are your 2 favorite restaurants? Those were the things that I was liking. But now looking at this, I'm starting to go back and think to myself, okay, maybe it is time to like my local Indian restaurant that, I go to and it's enjoyable. It's not my favorite meal that I've ever had, but if somebody was like, what's a good Indian place to go to in your neighborhood, that's what I'd recommend. What's a good ice cream spot? This is what I'd recommend.
You start to do similar to what you would do on Yelp, right? If you were an active Yelp user or even an active Foursquare user using the new stuff on Foursquare, you would go on there and you'd go, I want to leave a rating, and I might leave a recommendation. And because that wasn't very apparent on how to access that on Facebook before, you might not have had that desire to do that. Now you're going to look and go, well, shoot, people can find this and I really want to support these guys. I'm not only going to write a recommendation on Yelp, or maybe I'll opt to not do it on Yelp, and Facebook is my new place to do it. And, and that's as a user. And I think, we're going to talk about how marketers and entrepreneurs, because I look at those as in 2 different camps there, could leverage this as well. But what about, privacy concerns? I think I've seen a number of folks who have said, oh my gosh, this is going to everybody's going to be in an uproar about privacy now that their information's there, because that was the same sort of uproar that was that came about because of timeline, right? Suddenly everything that people thought was hidden and gone is now suddenly revealed. The books have been opened and set out on a big chronological timeline, and now and they got very upset about that initially, even though it's not like that content had ever gone away. It just kind of had been put in the archives, and those archives have been unveiled. Now it's not only about people going to your profile and seeing all that chronologically, it's about the possibility of it being seen by random folks. And I say that knowing that that's not actually the case, but by random folks who are searching for information using graph search. What are your thoughts on privacy?
I think there's 2 things that you've got to think about. The first is as a user. And as a user, I do think that the announcement of graph search basically forces you to review your profile and think to yourself, all right, if somebody found any detail inside of my profile, would I be okay with that? Or would I want to say, I didn't actually mean that? And, this sort of relates to a couple years ago. It was the trend to like things that were ironic, or like things that were funny, or like things that you didn't actually like, but you're like, okay, well, when I like this page, my friends are going to see that in their timeline, and they're going to get a little chuckle. And then maybe you forgot to unlike that page. Now is definitely the time to go back through, review those things, and unlike a bunch of things that you're like, whoa, if somebody searched for this, this is not what I would want my name to show up under. So as a user, I think it's definitely something that you need to be aware of. And there is sort of this level of people you don't really know having access to this data. So a big thing that Facebook promoted was the idea that you can search friends of friends. And this is how they go after things like LinkedIn. This is how they go after things like Match.com. let's say you wanted to find friends of friends who are single and like going to the movies. Well, that's not people you've already connected with. These are people who are one step removed. And maybe you message your friend and say, hey, I saw this cute person that I wanted to message. I saw that you're friends with them. Can you make a little intro? Or, let's say you were looking to hire a marketing person and you said, show me friends of friends who are currently unemployed but have a interest in marketing. So there is this level of people that you're not directly connected on a one-to-one basis suddenly having a lot more access to your data. So, summing that all up, I think that as a user, you need to go back through and really review your profile and cull it down a little bit and think to yourself, okay, what is the public face that I want to put on my Facebook profile? As a business, I think this is a huge opportunity. I think that, ignore the privacy, go all out, try to, make yourself as searchable as possible, encourage people to like your page, encourage people to add you to their existing list of favorites, with the idea being when somebody searches for, let's, return to that favorite friend of friend Indian restaurants, you want to be in that search result page. You want to be the number one restaurant that shows up that says, okay, 10 of my friends know somebody that likes this place. I'm going to go check that out. So I would say as a user, you need to definitely pay attention to privacy. As a business, let users figure out their own preferences and really focus on appearing in as many searches as possible, as many relevant searches as possible.
And we'll go ahead and link directly to, there's a specific privacy page that talks about privacy for graph search. And really the bottom line is, as I was kind of jokingly saying before about, who can see it and who can't, is if you make content public, it can be seen by anybody and therefore will be found in search. If you make content, anything that you yourself, my search will be different than Corey's because Corey's friends on Facebook are different than mine for the most part. And so whatever the content is, there's all these various levels of what can be found by folks based on the whole, like you said, Corey, friends of friends, or is it only my friends? So if I'm looking for something that Corey and I as friends on Facebook that he makes available, it'll show up. But for those that are not friends with Corey, if it's only for friends, they won't see it. In addition to that, elements of your profile, which are for the most part static, and you could just, for instance, when somebody bumps into Facebook, your Facebook profile, maybe they want to become a friend with you or whatever, and so they search for your name, they can only see the minimum that you provide for them to see. And so there's a bunch of things on your bio and your profile that they can see, and Facebook has provided privacy controls for that so that you could have, for instance, maybe your profile photo show up, but not everything else. Or you could have where you work show up, but not everything else. And so you can fudge with that a little bit. And we'll have some specific recommendations in a second. But bottom line is, we'll have a couple really great links. There's also an awesome article in VentureBeat that kind of dives a little bit farther into it that we have in our show notes and we'll link to. That I think also kind of plays around beyond the standard stuff that Facebook is covering. And that brings us kind of to the limitations, Corey, right? Is that as a marketer or as somebody who's trying to leverage it for business reasons or not business reasons, really, it's really dependent on people's privacy settings for their content. And the fact that people in general don't share things, for the most part, out of the billion people on Facebook, they don't really, the habit is not to share things publicly. I personally, quite honestly, a lot of my stuff much of my stuff is probably similar stuff to what I would share on, say, Twitter, but I have a closer network on Facebook. So that content, I'd say at least 50% of my content now that I post and everything on Facebook is public. And so that will be found. That'll be visible. That activity that I have will be made available. I am not completely aware of exactly what I've got public and not public on my profile per se, because it's been so long and it's not really critical. But now it will become more important for me, and I'm actually going to double back and check that stuff out. What do you think are some of the other possible limitations that'll keep this from being a really incredible tool for marketers and businesses and such?
I think the big one, and it's something that I mentioned, but just to reiterate, it's the idea that people don't know yet how to search for this thing to get the most value out of it. It's one of those tools where there's a lot of potential, and it looks really great, and it looks really sexy when Facebook puts together this video, and it's got people connecting over trail running and finding friends who want to go out and do these things and find new bands together. And sure, if you know how to search and you sit down and you think to yourself, okay, I want to, find 3 new people to go trail running with this weekend, and you search for them and you connect with them, and, you message your friend and say, hey, make an introduction, and that actually happens. That friend actually does do a legitimate introduction. Sure, that's going to be a success story. But for a majority of the people, that's not going to be their experience out of the gate. I think they'll toy around with it a little bit. They'll, do very basic searches. What are the movies my friends like? What are the TV shows my friends like? And these sort of second and third level search queries aren't going to happen, at least out of the gate. So I think one of the limitations that marketers need to be aware of is this is not going to be an overnight success story. This is not going to be, suddenly this thing goes live and you've got 30 people a day walking in your door that said, hey, I found you through this Facebook search and now I'm here and I'm ready to buy some stuff from your store. I think, the key is realistic expectations, understanding that there is going to be a period where I'm almost sure there's going to be a privacy backlash. There always is when Facebook makes these big announcements. There's going to be a lot of users that get in this uproar. Oh, everybody can see all this stuff that I didn't want them to see. That'll happen. There'll be a period where everyone kind of goes back through and edits their profile and deletes some things that are old and hopefully adds some things that are new. So that's going to take some time. Facebook's going to have to do a lot of education around ways to do interesting searches. And I do think that they're going to do that. I think you'll see things appear like sample searches, suggested searches, that sort of thing, where, much like Foursquare has done with recommending things for you based on your existing data, Facebook will have, maybe at the top of your timeline, it says, hey, did you know that you can now search for, local sushi restaurants that your friends like? And you'll click that and it'll run that search for you. And that's kind of how they'll get people up to speed. But that's going to take some time. And so I think what you want to be doing over the next 6 months in order to prepare for that is encouraging your fans, encouraging your customers, encouraging the people that already like your brand to recommend it to friends, to, like your actual page. Maybe they've liked some sort of generic version of your page, but you want to make sure that everybody is grouped together under your official page. Basically, auditing your data, auditing the way people are connected to you, and making sure that when somebody does search for you and you do appear, you're putting your best foot forward. It's kind of in the best light that you could possibly appear.
So I think the whole kind of like friends of friends, kind of almost a la LinkedIn introduction is a really interesting thing that in all of the instances that I've been thinking about over the last couple of days, I hadn't thought of how. Let's then continue on to then how can the average marketer leverage some of these features currently, and this would extend and of course be expanded upon once additional things happen. So what do you think, Corey? How can the average marketer today say they get the feature? How can they take advantage of this?
Step one, and we say this, a number of episodes we said this. Make sure your data is correct. If somebody finds your business via a Facebook search and clicks on your business and looks for your address, looks for your phone number, looks for your website through your Facebook information and doesn't find it, that is a huge missed opportunity. So go back through, make sure all that information is correct, make sure it's all up to date. And then assuming you've done that, which is sort of the basics, if you wanted to go to the 201 course, the mid to advanced course, maybe make some recommendations for what people could search for that would actually find your business in addition to other businesses. So, if you are a furniture store, recommend that people run a search inside of Facebook's graph search for furniture stores that my friends of friends have liked. And it's going to surface you, but it's also going to surface other businesses. The main idea here is getting people used to the idea of not just doing basic searches, but actually diving in and using Facebook graph search in interesting ways. I think that Facebook's going to do some of that, but I think that us as, marketers and advertisers on Facebook are going to have to do some of the heavy lifting as well to kind of teach people how to use this and how to source interesting insights out of this tool.
Yeah, and some other additional ways, like for, now again, because of how many users there are on Facebook, you have this kind of unprecedented pool of individuals to cull through. And so think about things like finding influencers that are on Facebook. So you might be able to find folks who you want to reach out to, who are in a particular field, who live in a particular area, who maybe have specific tastes or have liked specific companies or even work at specific companies. So say you're just like LinkedIn, you end up using Facebook to look for, executives that work at Google or people who work at I don't know. I'm just saying, people that work at Genentech who live in Austin. I don't even know if Austin has a Genentech at all, but you can cut that up in any way that you want in order to find people who you may want to actually reach out to, even though Facebook may not be the end point. Facebook could be the starting point, and then from there you can go and do a Google search or do a LinkedIn search and learn a little bit more about them from there. This is the sort of information that could be on Facebook and revealed by Facebook is going to be different than what you find elsewhere. And the relationships, like you were saying, you might actually not realize that you have between you and that individual if it says like, well, that person is friends with 2 or 3 of the folks that you're friends with. That's pretty awesome. It's also a way for you, if you're going to have, obviously, you have a Facebook page, but you see the names of those folks who have liked your page. Maybe you want to do a little investigation and see if you can get to know those folks a little bit better, or folks that, again, might know them or whatever, but they have to have publicly available information in order for you to even see that. But it doesn't hurt to try and use that. Also look at to do a little competition, a little competitive analysis for your particular company. Go ahead and look for those that are in other areas. Maybe there's an area you want to expand your business to. And so you say, look for company X in city X, or look for these types of company or this type of restaurant or whatever the case is in city X. And you'll get a local search and you'll be able to see their Facebook page. You'll be able to see how many followers, basically how many people have liked that page and learn a bit about them. And this is going to continue to expand as more information becomes available. Then you're going to be able to obviously kind of the more possibilities there are. How about individual entrepreneurs? I mean, I think this is quite different, obviously, because Facebook is a people social network, right? And so the sort of information that you have and the way that it relates to you and other folks is quite different than when you're searching for a brand or you are a brand looking for customer information and brand information. Right now, I don't know if you've seen the change that they've changed what used to be called subscribers to followers now on Facebook. And so they've had that model now where anybody can essentially follow you and again, in the past, subscribe to you. And that is basically like following somebody on Twitter and wanting their public information to the public posts to show up in a feed. And again, that's kind of where I made the change and started making more of my content public, because there are a few people here and there that were subscribing to me, and I wanted to provide something that I felt really wasn't so personal that I didn't want to give other folks access to check out. I made sure that it was public so those folks could take a look at it. Now there's an opportunity even more for me, if I want to find interesting people to subscribe to or to follow now, as they're calling it, I can do a search for them and I can follow them just like I could if I were doing a people search of who to follow on Twitter, right?
Yeah, exactly. And, you mentioned entrepreneurs. I think that's exactly the way that I would use this tool. I would use it as a influencer finder. I would use it as a potential highly engaged customer finder. You can easily imagine, let's say you were a outdoor company, you sell camping goods and things like that. A search for friends of friends that like camping, that like hiking, that like outdoors, that's going to reveal not only, the obvious of just people that like that, but somebody that's gone through the trouble of adding camping to their list of likes. That's an above average person. That's not somebody that, once every 6 months gets in their car and kind of goes out on a camping trip. That's the more advanced user, the person that's more likely to be looking for new gear, new companies, new products. So, doing those types of searches, finding somebody who has a lot of friends, has a lot of connections, and then maybe just reaching out to them and saying, "Hey, I found you through this new Facebook graph search tool. I'm testing it out. I'm trying to meet some new people. It seems like you might be interested in the products that my store carries. No pressure. I would just love to kind of see what you're interested in." That type of introduction could be extremely valuable, especially in the early stages. I think there's going to be this learning process and this learning phase, there's the opportunity for the fast learners to get involved and say, "Hey, we haven't all figured this out, but I'm trying to do some cool stuff. Maybe you can help me out a little bit." And, that's going to be acceptable in the first couple of months in a way that's not acceptable 6 months or a year into this product. So I think there's a lot of opportunities there. Anything else that you'd add? What else, do you think entrepreneurs should be considering for this graph search tool?
If you're going to travel someplace and you're just trying to meet new people, it's definitely just really a great networking tool. Whether it's, you want to meet a new partner, business partner, or vendor, or decision maker, influencer. I mean, really the sky's the limit in that case. And quite honestly, that can happen probably now. I think that there aren't really any limitations at the moment as to how that works. And I would assume that most of those pieces, those elements of content within a bio or a profile on Facebook are actually publicly available. It's really the content and the things that people have said publicly and things like their photos and such, which are not as public. And so I think entrepreneurs have a leg up on businesses a little bit for the time being. So let's quickly go over what are some of the other things that entrepreneurs should do right now so that they themselves can prepare for this, because it's not only about what you can do to find other folks or to find information. It's about also making yourself now, it's like, what do you want to call it? Like graph search optimized, right? I mean, whatever the term might be, but to optimize yourself to be found. I think here's a few suggestions that we put together is, make sure you read the privacy page and clearly understand that what it's like to be searched for by somebody else. What is it that's visible, publicly visible, and even visible to friends of friends and such, just like you said. Pay a lot of attention to things that might damage your personal brand or your reputation. Do you have any racy photos of you with somebody, or just, by yourself, or, any of those sorts of situations? Are you liking things or sharing things that might be a little bit more kind of polarizing than you might expect? Things that are super politically charged, things that are, again, with the words racy. And then, and that hiding them does not equal deleting them. That's one of the things that Facebook is starting to really be even more open than before about, is that when you hide something from your timeline, it doesn't mean that it's not actually visible in other forms when somebody is looking at content. So when you hide something from your timeline, it just means when you go to your timeline, it's not there. But if you're tagged in it, for instance, it still becomes one of those photos that people can find when they say, "Let me see photos of Corey." Well, those are photos where Corey has been tagged in. So you actually have to use your activity log, which is, again, another tool that's really interesting and great, but folks don't use. And you have to physically go back there and delete it. Even though it's hidden, you have to delete it. A few other things real quickly is to check out your bio and make sure that it has, for instance, links that go to maybe your LinkedIn account, maybe, websites that you are participating in or part of, both personal and professional. Include your contact information if that's something you want people to have. So your email, a phone number, whatever you feel is appropriate. And actually, they have work history on LinkedIn. On Facebook. And so most people, I think, have maybe what their current job is, or have maybe still forgotten that they have their old current job instead of updating it to the latest. And so treat that as a resume. I mean, put where you work and put the places that you've worked in the past, and you never know. Maybe there's a job opportunity that's there. Maybe when somebody's getting to know you, they can see what your work experience has been. And lastly, I don't know, have you seen this, Corey? But when I took a quick peek today just to make sure I wasn't missing anything, there was a place to put projects that you were working on. Were you aware of that?
No, I hadn't seen that. It seems like something they maybe borrowed from LinkedIn and kind of renamed.
Yeah, yeah. And so, I might add, for instance, SoLoMo show and maybe something else that I've got going on. But I was really surprised to see that there. And I think it's something that people should obviously take advantage of outside of the standard, who I am and this is my bio sort of thing.
So, Adam, I've got a listener question for you. We had Twitter user Sunshine Mug posed the following. Facebook's main motive for this, in your opinion. So what do you think Facebook's motives are behind launching this? We've talked a little bit about, businesses, entrepreneurs, what they would get out of this. What does Facebook get out of launching something like graph search? I think this is an interesting question, and I've got an idea or an answer sort of formulated in my mind, but I'm intrigued to see what you think Facebook's motivation is behind the launch of graph search.
I mean, I think it's finally making use of the data that they have for the average person, and the design of it is unlike anything else that's out there. So I think in the design of it and the way that it's manifested itself, it's almost like introducing the world. I mean, it sounds really big, but introducing the world to really a new paradigm of how they look at their connections and the things around them and the stuff that they've been doing on Facebook. Ultimately, for the long run, I think that obviously it's adding now a place where things like sponsored things could happen. So you put in things like, just like you would sponsored search results on Google or a sponsored tweet on Twitter, you're going to eventually have the opportunity to say, even though I'm looking for this sort of sushi restaurant, and I'm looking at all the places my friends have been to, this particular place is paid a few extra bucks and they're going to be at the top of the list or they're going to be off to the side or something like that. And that really is going to be as significant as the amount of use that particular feature gets on Facebook. What do you think?
Yeah, if I had a success bell, I'd be ringing it right now. That was the exact answer I was going to give. I think that this is sort of Facebook unlocking an entire new opportunity for ad dollars. And, you think about it, something like friends of friends that are into sci-fi movies and, watching Big Bang Theory, that's a very specific search. But if you search for something like, what are the burger restaurants that my friends like in San Francisco, there could be a list of, 20 to 30 potential results that show up there. And I think for, a as yet undetermined price, Facebook is going to be willing to at least boost you to the top of that list and maybe highlight you as a paid result, but at the very same time, put you at the top and say, 3 people like this restaurant, you should check it out. It happens to be a sponsored result, and here's the other results as well, but, this person paid a little bit of extra. So I think, number one, Facebook is definitely unlocking that advertising potential, which, as a marketer and advertiser, that's nothing to sneeze at. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. I think that if people are using it in the right way, that's probably smart dollars to spend. If you're spending, $1 to appear in a search result for somebody that's looking for a new restaurant to check out, the chance that somebody then sees that result and goes to your restaurant is really high, in my opinion. So I think that that's a smart spend of advertising dollars. I'd say the other goal that they have for launching this is to get people to reconsider just the overall data held within their profile. So again, I mentioned the idea that, maybe you liked something 4 or 5 years ago and totally forgot about it. I think a couple of odd searches and a couple of people finding you and saying, hey, I didn't know that you liked this TV show, and you thinking to yourself, well, I didn't really know I liked that either. That's going to cause people to go to their Facebook profile, review the data, make sure it's up to date, and then periodically keep it current. So I think a big motivator for what they're doing is to, really encourage people to keep a more active watch on their data, keep it up to date, and keep it current and useful both for yourself and for this Facebook graph search.
Optimize it, so to speak, right?
Yes, exactly. So Sunshine Mug threw in her own opinion here. She said that she agrees that it can be Facebook's way to unlock the data it holds and to monetize. So Monetize is probably our word of the day here. A lot of opportunities for monetization, both on Facebook's behalf and, again, potential use of smart marketing dollars. It'll depend on how purposeful people are when they're doing these searches. I think that's part of why Google is so successful with search, is people go there very specifically to buy something, find something, do something. They're action oriented. So Facebook can make sure that people are action oriented when they're doing graph searches. There is a huge potential there. So I think that's the direction they're going in, and we'll have to kind of keep an eye on whether they can get there or not.
Yeah, and really quickly before we kind of head into the final stretch here, it reminds me of really the opportunity that there is when somebody uses Google, right? You know that when they do a search, there is an intention behind that search and that somebody's looking for information. And so because of that, it's an opportune time to market to them, okay? And that's kind of the differentiation between what people have said about Facebook and how you can market to folks on Facebook, and why it's so different than, say, something like search marketing, because people on Facebook aren't usually there they're not there for shopping, right? It happens that they may have some element of discovery because somebody's sharing something from a particular company, and then suddenly you're like, oh, well, I see that Corey liked this, or he posted on this particular brand's page, and then I discover a brand that I might go ahead and like, or I might read through their posts. And I've had that happen frequently. I'll look through and I'll see something that I didn't like, but somehow was Facebook has done that very subtly, where they've revealed things that other people have liked through the grand scheme of things. But now it's a little bit more intentional. You are actually desiring information at that time. And if you're desiring, for instance, to find an Indian restaurant, then the likelihood of you being ready to purchase, or whatever that instance is, spend money, that's going to drive foot traffic that evening to an Indian restaurant, because that's what you're asking for. Where on the average, without that element, you don't really... The timing of when somebody is willing to spend money is very different when they're perusing Facebook versus when they're searching on Google. And this now brings the two of those elements together, where Facebook can finally have an impact that it really wasn't, marketers weren't seeing happen before. So really quickly, we had a few things for businesses and what they should do. And, you want to go through those really quick, Corey, because I think we talked about entrepreneurs. We might have left off a couple of things that businesses should think of, and then we can head on into our lightning round and final stretch here.
Yeah, I think, we touched on it a little bit, but just to highlight it specifically, if you're a business and you're, keeping track of the newest news and thinking to yourself, all right, I know Facebook graph search is out there. What do I need to do now? Number one would be make sure your data is up to date. Make sure that if you do appear in a search result, somebody can contact you, they can find your email address, they can find your phone number, they can find your website. Any time that goes wrong, that's a missed opportunity and potentially a huge loss of value. So make sure your information is up to date. And then number two would be encourage your customers to like your page. All of this is based on somebody liking you. You're not going to appear in a search result if a friend of friend hasn't actually liked your page. So it doesn't matter if somebody comes to your business, once a week for the last year. If they haven't liked your page on Facebook, you are not showing up in graph search. So encourage people to like your page, and if needed, incentivize people to like your page. Give, free appetizer to anybody that can come in and show that they've liked your page on Facebook. Give a 10% rebate. Give, who cares? Give anything. Just find a way of incentivizing your customers to like your page, because suddenly...
Free chocolate, free ice cream, give it up.
Give it all. Even if you're not a chocolate or ice cream company, give away chocolate bars and ice cream. Who cares? Like, it used to be, okay, great. I show up in somebody's interests, and if somebody happens to be browsing a friend's page, maybe they see that, but, not that valuable. Suddenly that is extremely valuable. So as we said before, spend a little money, do a little bribing, do a little motivation, find ways of getting people to like your page, because, it's yet to be seen how valuable it is, but it's degrees of magnitude. It's guaranteed to be valuable, and it could go anywhere from somewhat to extremely valuable based on how often and how frequently people use this search. So
I would add to that, Corey. You bring up a good point that even doing sponsored posts, but doing them with the like, you can actually put a sponsored post, I'm trying to remember again if they're sponsored posts or stories in this instance, but the ones that actually have a like button that says, your friend Corey liked this. So it's targeting the friends of friends in that aspect to just say that Corey liked this particular page. That is just making that connection of like, right? They could click like there, or they could then discover, but using sponsored posts to drive likes, like is, at least previously not a very powerful indicator of success, because all it's done is provide the opportunity for you to now continue to show folks value in their feed and get them to engage with you. I still, in my philosophical perspective, would encourage that. But just like you said, Corey, now liking does more than just provide you an opt-in opportunity to share content with them in their feed. It's now providing you an opt-in opportunity to basically associate a broader reach of who finds you in graph search, right?
yeah, definitely. Encourage a like, do whatever you can, get that like. It's extremely important. All right, so the Facebook thing, amazing. A lot of great stuff there. I think it's something we're going to have to return to because, I haven't even had a chance to beta test the thing. I've watched the videos, I've dived in, but, there's still a lot of unknowns. So I think it's something we're going to revisit, but definitely encourage people to check some of the links that we'll include in the show notes. Look at how Facebook is positioning this. Keep an eye on. They've already written things like, what is the privacy implications? So it's going to be something Facebook's discussing a lot. Definitely keep up with that and keep an eye on this thing over the next couple weeks as it sort of emerges and people get a chance to test it out. And then if we do have any learnings, we'll be sure to share those back with the audience and keep everybody up to date on the latest and greatest when it comes to Facebook search. And with that, let's dive into the lightning round. We got a couple stories that I want to make sure we cover. So what do you say we dive right in? All right, 60 seconds on the clock. Ready and go. Our first story is an application called Firegram, and if you are running to your computer to check it out, don't, because Firegram no longer exists. It lasted literally less than 24 hours. It got publicized on TechCrunch. Apple discovered it, shut it down. Or I'm sorry, Instagram discovered it and shut it down. Firegram was basically an application that guaranteed likes on your Instagram photos. And, 10 minutes into the announcement of this thing, somebody had figured out how it worked. It basically went in, it added 30 hashtags to your photo, waited about 10 seconds, deleted those hashtags, added 30 more, waited 10 seconds, deleted those hashtags, added 30 more. But what was crazy about this is it actually worked. Real people liked your photo. They could guarantee the number of likes. So, does the application itself work? No. Does the technique work? I think it does. I think this is a reminder that it's important to consider the hashtags and descriptions that you're including, because those things actually matter when it comes to new people discovering your photo. All right, Adam, I know that you are slightly better at adding unique and interesting Instagram hashtags to your photos, so I'm interested to see what your take on Firegram was. Do you think that this is a good reminder of, adding maybe data slightly outside of the exact topic of your photo, or was this just some sort of crazy experiment gone awry? 60 seconds on the clock, ready and go.
They stole my technique. That's all I have to say. No, the interesting thing about it is, and I can see how this works. When we started talking about Instagram a long, long time ago, and when Instagram really, as it was peaking, there are some tools out there that showed what were the top hashtags across Instagram, which were the ones that had the most photos, which likely were the ones that were the most used or the most also potentially trafficked and popular. And what happened was if I felt that they were appropriate, and most of them are really vanilla, like IG, like hashtag IG, for instance, which really doesn't mean anything. Then I would actually start to apply those in 4 or 5 or 6 of those to the photos that were appropriate. I was never doing things that were outside of the context of the photo. And within seconds of putting a hashtag on, it goes from having a couple people to having many, many folks liking a photo that are people that are not even following me. So I'm not surprised that they got the results that they did.
A lot of interesting things. I love that story because I love the fact that like we can talk about an application that had a lifespan of less than 24 hours, but still get a useful bit of data out of it. So, can't check it out. By all means, check out the blog post. Some really interesting comments on it. Some really interesting coverage of it. It was sort of a proof of concept, and now it's gone. But really, some interesting things going on with Firegram. So, at least worth paying attention to from a philosophical point of view. All right, we got one more story in the lightning round. So I've got 60 seconds on the clock, and we are going to jump right in. Ready and go. Timbuk2, the San Francisco-based messenger bag company, announced recently that 18% of their orders were coming through the iPad. This is huge. This number, if they would have announced 5%, I would have been like, holy crap, 5% of the orders coming through the iPad. Almost 1 in 5 orders coming through the iPad is huge. And these are actual numbers. This is a data point you can point to and say to yourself, iPad shopping is big. It's no longer this thing that maybe we need to pay attention to it. People are shopping on their iPad. It's happening. They're buying high dollar products. Timbuk2 bags are not cheap. These are $100, $150, $200 messenger bags that people are buying on their iPad. If you're not paying attention to this, you're missing out. They launched an HTML5 site. They've really focused on mobile, and I think for good reason. I think that, you should see this story, and if you're not already, you should be thinking to yourself, I need to go mobile, and I need to do it ASAP. All right, Adam, 18% of orders coming through the iPad. Was that impressive, or do you think this is just lucky for Timbuk2 and nobody else can duplicate it? Ready and go.
I think this is, it's not just luck, it's proving, when talking about mobile commerce, the tablet format has been talked about as being the place where shoppers love to go. So the fact that they've leveraged the tablet to do this and that the iPad has generated that much traffic doesn't necessarily surprise me. It's not like it's the iPad device itself. It's just that the iPad ends up being where the most tablet traffic is coming from. It's likely just as popular on any of the other tablets as well, but folks aren't using it as much. And so I think this is a testament to kind of making sure that you think about a tablet optimized experience. It's not just about a mobile phone or smartphone optimized experience, but a tablet optimized experience as well. And I think you might be a little surprised at the sort of reaction you might get in that same sense. The tablet is really the new kind of shopping tool. It's the best buddy for the shopper.
Yes, indeed. I agree with that 100%. I think, like I said, pay attention to the tablet because it's already big and it's only getting bigger. All right, well, we covered a lot today, but as always, we would love to hear from you if you listened to this episode and thought to yourself, you know what, I've got a question for those guys, or hey, maybe I've got a topic for next episode and I hope they cover it. We even covered some audience feedback that came in live during the episode, so as you can tell, we are responsive and love hearing from our audience. So, hey, feel free to even just reach out and say hi if you want to. We'd love to meet you. We'd love to get to know a little bit more about what interests you and how we can make the show better suited to your needs. So if you'd like to get in touch with us, there's a number of ways to do that. The quickest and easiest is via Twitter. We are both available at SoLoMo Show, or you can reach myself directly. I'm at Corey O'Brien.
And I'm at Secret Sushi. You can also find us via email or send us an email. Feel free to email us at solomoshow@gmail.com. That's solomoshow@gmail.com. We are, of course, on Facebook, and we share things beyond the show topics on Facebook that we discover here and there throughout the day. We have a Google Plus page, and we also have a Pinterest account where we have a number of boards and have our shows up there as well as other things. So follow us there and repin our content to your heart's delight.
There we go. And all of the links that we discussed today, as well as the links to the social channels that we just mentioned, can be found in the show notes. We've mentioned show notes a couple of times during this episode, and if you thought to yourself, where do I find those? They are available at solomoshow.com, or they should also be available in your podcast player of choice. Most podcast players have an option to view either links or show notes or information, whatever they call it, and we include that in our iTunes download that you can grab. So we encourage you to check those out. It's a way of diving deeper into some of these topics. We often include supplementary links that Really include things maybe we didn't get a chance to cover in the episode itself. A lot of value there, so check out the show notes if you were intrigued by one of the topics we covered and want to dive deeper. And with that, we will call this episode a wrap, and we hope that you join us next week for another great episode of the SoLoMo Show.
Take care.